Welcome to the deep dive. We're about to plunge into an event that remains, well, one of the most compelling and frankly debated incidents in history.
Absolutely. And we're doing it armed with a truly unique source, a book written in direct collaboration with key witnesses and investigators of the Rendlesham Forest incident. This isn't just rehashing old news, it's pulling insights directly, from the people who were there.
That's right. Our mission today is to take this source material, this inside story, and really unpack its layers for you, not just list facts, but extract the most important details, the different perspectives presented within the book, and the unanswered questions that still hang over this whole affair.
Right. To set the scene, we need to go back to December 1980. The Cold War is very much still on, and we're at these twin U.S. Air Force bases situated on British soil, RAF Bentwaters and RAF Woodbridge.
And that geographical detail is actually really important because, as the source points out, being U.S. bases on British soil creates this kind of complex jurisdictional situation, like who's in charge, who investigates what.
Exactly. And that becomes a significant factor later on. So the core of our story revolves initially around two men, Staff Sergeant Jim Penniston and Airman First Class John Burroughs. They were U.S. Air Force security policemen and, according to the source, were among the very first responders on the scene of something. Well, something unusual.
And it's worth noting, right up front from the source, that both of them were actually quite skeptical about UFOs initially. These weren't guys, looking for little green men. They were standard military personnel focused on security.
Yeah, they were security cops. Yet that's exactly the kind of situation that unfolded. A security alert came up just outside the wire of RAF Woodbridge, meaning just beyond the protected perimeter fence of the base. This led them and others into the surrounding forest to investigate some strange lights.
Okay, let's unpack this first encounter then.
Yeah.
According to the source's detailed account, this happened early in the morning, December 26, 1980. Penniston gets called out with Airman Edward Cabensag to meet up with Burroughs and Airman Steffens near the East Gate.
And what's immediately striking, based on the source's description, is this departure from standard procedure. Penniston wasn't given a full briefing, apparently. He was just told, go to the gate for information. The book suggests this raises a key question right away. Who in the chain of command might have known something early on? And why weren't they being, explicit over communications?
And speaking of communications, the radios, the source points out that 4 separate radios they were using started malfunctioning over distance.
Yeah, 4 of them.
Which forced them into this really low-tech relay system. Seems like something was definitely interfering with their comms right from the start.
Precisely. That interference is a significant detail noted in the source, happening right at the outset. Despite these issues, Burroughs and Penniston, they pressed deeper into the forest to find the source of these strange lights.
Now, remember Penniston's initial mindset we just mentioned? Skeptical, expecting a rational explanation. How did that hold up when they actually found what was causing the lights?
Well, according to Penniston's account in the source, it didn't really hold up at all. The object they encountered was described as metallic, triangular, roughly, 2 to 3 meters across the base, and about 2 meters high.
Okay.
And it wasn't just sitting there. It illuminated the immediate forest area with this bright white light. It also had distinct colored lights, a pulsing red light on top, and banks of blue lights underneath. He wasn't sure if it was hovering just off the ground or maybe resting on short legs.
And the description of its movement is just as striking in the book. It apparently maneuvered through the trees silently.
Silently, yeah.
And then, according to the account, disappeared at an unbelievable rate of speed. Literally gone in the blink of an eye. That kind of performance is, well, hard to explain conventionally.
Definitely. The source also includes accounts of an environmental effect happening concurrently. Nearby farmers' animals, specifically at a place called Green Farm, reportedly went into a frenzy right around this time.
Okay, here's where the source's account from Penniston gets really intense. He describes feeling this strong compulsion, like being drawn towards the craft, getting close enough to actually touch it. He felt the surface warm, like metal, but then rougher in places where these symbols were etched.
Yes, he specifically notes seeing and feeling these etched symbols or glyphs. He describes a triangle centered among other pictorial symbols, with the largest symbol being that triangle, about 3 feet long and maybe a handprint high.
Wow.
Penniston's own account in the source describes him shaking uncontrollably at this point, feeling intense disbelief and just overwhelm.
And what's fascinating is how Burroughs, who is standing right there, experienced this same moment differently, according to the book.
Right, their perspectives diverge here.
Burroughs saw Penniston go into the light, described seeing him sort of disappear visually for a moment, saw the light around the object explode, and said Penniston was actually gone for several minutes before reappearing.
Which highlights the profoundly different, almost subjective perceptions, even among the primary witnesses, right there together.
So after the object just blinked out, what did they do?
Their immediate actions, as reported in the source, were to revisit the site in the dark and look for physical evidence. And they found it. 3 distinct indentations in the ground, about 1.5 inches deep and 7 inches in diameter.
Okay, actual marks.
Actual marks, along with tree damage, abrasion, and sap marks on nearby trees. The book emphasizes that this physical evidence provided them with undeniable assurance that the incident was real, not some shared delusion or hallucination.
And Penniston took things a step further that night.
Right.
Doing something kind of secret.
Yeah, exactly. Driven by this feeling that the event would fade fast from radar, basically, that it would quickly be suppressed or forgotten by the authorities, he personally took plaster casts of those ground indentations. His own physical evidence.
Smart move, maybe.
Perhaps. Their movements after that involved searching further out. They initially thought maybe an aircraft had gone down somewhere.
Right.
And that search led them to identify a beacon light, which turned out to be the Orford Ness Lighthouse. Now, it's important, as the source clarifies, that witnesses saw the lighthouse after the main object encounter.
Ah, okay. So it wasn't the main event itself.
Correct. It addresses that common skeptical theory that it was just the lighthouse all along. They saw the lighthouse later.
Gotcha. So what about the initial debriefing back on base?
Well, the source describes a, let's say, sanitized report being given to the wing commander, Colonel Gordon Williams. Deputy Base Commander Colonel Charles Halt was there too, and another colonel. The witnesses' names were apparently sanitized in the written reports, and they were told very clearly to treat all discussion about it as top secret. They were essentially assured that this incident will never see the light of day.
Never see the light of day.
Yeah, and Penniston specifically noted the strange lack of questions from Colonel Williams, almost as if he already knew about this kind of phenomenon or wasn't surprised.
Interesting. And the source mentions potential issues with the witness statements themselves.
Yes, the book highlights what it describes as early signs of witness statements being, well, manipulated. Ed Cabensag's statement was reportedly retyped, and he was told to sign it under duress.
Oh, wow.
And Penniston, according to the source, believes only Burroughs' initial raw statement was truly authentic, suggesting others might have been coached or perhaps even written by people in authority.
Okay, so that's the intense and very physical first night. The next major development, according to the source, involves the Deputy Base Commander, Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt, taking an investigation team back out there.
Right. This is the night of December 27th, going into the 28th. Halt takes a team, including Burroughs again, back to the site from night 1.
And what was his focus?
The source states that Halt's focus was really conducting his own retrospective investigation at that initial landing site. And it was in daylight this time that they were able to really examine the physical evidence properly.
So they saw the indentations again.
Yes, the 3 indentations and the tree damage, noting the abrasion and sap marks. A key detail mentioned on Halt's famous audio recording, which the source discusses, is that the tree marks were all at the same height, suggesting, a stable object had been there.
And this is where the famous radiation readings come in, isn't it?
Exactly. The source details the disaster preparedness officer, Lieutenant Nevels, using a Geiger counter. He recorded beta-gamma readings that peaked, this is the keyword, peaked at 0.1 milliattensions right in the depressions and the center area where the object was seen.
Okay, 0.1. Is that high?
Actually, no. 0.1 milliatons per hour is a very low level of radiation, barely above normal background in some places. But the source emphasizes the significance isn't the absolute level, it's the fact that the readings peaked exactly where the object was sighted on the ground and were lower further away.
I see. So it's the localized spike.
Precisely. While skeptics later question the equipment calibration or the readings themselves, the book argues the crucial point is that something caused a detectable peak right at the site of the encounter, which is unusual for a random spot in a forest. They also got moderate readings, maybe 0.05 to 0.07 on the side of the tree facing the depressions.
And this investigation is famously documented by Halt's own cassette recording he made that night.
Yes, the source draws heavily from that tape. It mentions specific kind of eerie observations Halt captured, Strange sounds coming from the farmer's barnyard animals nearby, again.
Like the first night.
Like the first night. And later, seeing a red, sort of sun-like object through the trees, which was pulsing, throwing off what he described as glowing particles, and eventually breaking into 5 distinct white objects.
5 objects, and the tape captured a close encounter, too.
Oh, yeah. Around 3:05 a.m. that night, Halt describes an object 10 degrees south moving directly towards them, and then a distinct pencil-like beam coming down from it, illuminating the ground right near them. The book really conveys the tension, the excitement, and the clear fear in the men's voices on that tape. It culminates in Halt's just astonished statement, "This is unreal."
And Halt's assessment of what he saw, did that change over time?
It did. The source points out that his later, stronger assessment, given after more reflection and time had passed, was that the object was definitely under intelligent control, and ultimately he believed it was extraterrestrial in origin.
Extraterrestrial. That's a strong statement from a deputy base commander.
Very strong. And the source notes this contrast with his more guarded and, let's say, cautious initial language immediately following the events, especially in his official memo.
Ah, yes, the Halt memo. Let's talk about that.
Right. This memo was sent January 13th, 1981, titled simply Unexplained Lights. The source notes its significance as official military documentation of the event, but it critically highlights a major error within it.
Which was?
It stated the first sighting Penniston and Burroughs encounter was on December 27th.
But it was the 26th.
Exactly. It was the 26th. And the consequence of that date error, as detailed in the source, was pretty significant. When the UK Ministry of Defense, the MODI, later checked radar data for official records, guess which dates they checked?
The wrong ones, based on the memo.
The wrong ones. Penniston, according to the source, specifically wonders if this date error wasn't just an accident, but perhaps deliberate. He calls it a cunning sleight of hand, maybe intended to allow authorities to later claim no radar evidence for the first night.
That's quite an accusation.
It is. But the source also points out that despite downplaying the incident and Halt's own very prominent role in the second night, the memo still officially described a metallic, triangular object and included those radiation readings.
So even the downplayed version was pretty remarkable.
Yeah, the source basically calls it pretty sensational stuff to be included in an official military document from a deputy base commander, regardless of that date error.
Okay, let's move on to the aftermath. The source describes a pretty disturbing period for the witnesses, especially Burroughs and Penniston.
Disturbing is putting it mildly. It speaks of debriefings that allegedly involve threats, the administration of narcotics truth serums, basically, and the use of hypnosis.
Seriously, hypnosis and drugs.
According to the book, yes. The claim presented is that these methods were used first to uncover, then to distort, and finally to bury the truth of what they actually experienced out there.
That's intense. And it didn't stop there, right? There were health issues.
Yeah, the source details significant health problems they attribute directly to their proximity to the craft that night. Ongoing vertigo, severe headaches, memory issues, strange unknown infections, and chronic fatigue syndrome.
And they need their medical records for treatment.
Exactly. The book emphasizes that physicians treating them have specifically requested their military medical records to help with diagnosis and treatment because they suspect exposure to something unusual, perhaps radiation or some other field effect.
Which has led to this long, frustrating quest for those records, as detailed in the book.
Incredibly frustrating. Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, requests sent to various agencies, State Department, Air Force, CIA, have apparently been met with denials or classic bureaucratic runarounds, like not State Department records, no longer under our purview, or the CIA's famous can neither confirm nor deny whether such records even exist.
Even with help from people like a former senator.
Right. Even with help from former Senator John Kill, they've had immense difficulty getting the records released. The suggestion raised in the source, based on this stonewalling, is that their standard medical records might actually be classified, perhaps even held up the Veterans Affairs, VA, under some kind of special handling.
Classifying medical records because of a UFO sighting, that seems extreme.
It does. The source also points to broader signs of what it calls official containment or cover-up. Penniston's official written log of events from that night, his security blotter, was reportedly pulled and classified almost immediately. And many personnel who were involved in the incident, even peripherally, experienced accelerated permanent change of station, PCS moves, basically. They were transferred off the base unusually quickly.
Get him out of there.
Seems like it. Both Penniston and Burroughs, the source says, felt a deep sense of betrayal by their chain of command, who they felt just abandoned them after the event.
And the official responses to inquiries over the years.
Perceived as evasive, according to the source. The USAF essentially tried to hand the whole thing off to the UK authorities, saying it's a Brit affair because the main sightings happened technically outside the wire, just off base property.
Convenient.
And the UK's Ministry of Defence, MOD, initially denied even having Halt's report when internal documents later showed they clearly did have it. Publicly, they kept directing media attention towards this simple lighthouse theory.
So the source highlights this major discrepancy between the MOD's public stance and what they might have known internally.
Absolutely. Their formal public guidance consistently stated no defense interest in UFOs, denied any contact with alien beings, and often used dismissive, almost condescending terms like flying saucer and little green men when talking to the public or media.
But internally,
the source reveals, the MOD had actually been researching UFO sightings since way back in 1953. They clearly had an interest and were, the book argues, actively misleading the public about it.
which brings us to Project Condign.
Exactly. The source describes Project Condign as a highly classified UK study. The classification was apparently secret UK Eyes A, which is very high, conducted by MOD intelligence specifically into the UFO mystery. This ran from 1993 to 2000.
And I looked at Rendlesham.
Explicitly, yes. The book states that this internal study did consider the Rendlesham Forest incident as part of its analysis of UAP cases.
And it was handled by a defense contractor. Why?
A key detail mentioned is that it was handled by a defense contractor. The source suggests this might have been partly to provide an exemption from Freedom of Information Act scrutiny, basically keeping its findings more easily hidden from public view.
Clever. What did Condign find, according to the source?
Some key findings included recognizing the relevance of plasma and magnetic fields to what they called UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena. It also recommended further investigation for potential military applications, like could this phenomenon be weaponized or harnessed?
Okay, military applications. What else?
Crucially, it raised significant air safety concerns. The report specifically stated that no attempt should be made to outmaneuver a UAP, implying these things could potentially react dangerously or cause accidents. It even mentioned that pilot attempts to evade UAP could potentially cause fatalities.
Fatalities, that's serious.
Very serious. And the report, as noted in the source, also specifically suggested that the Rendlesham witnesses were probably exposed to UAP radiation for longer than normal, linking back to their health issues.
Did they tell civilian pilots about this danger?
Critically, the book finds no evidence that these serious air safety findings from Condign were ever briefed to civil aviation authorities, like the CAA in the UK or the FAA in the US.
Wow. So a potential known danger kept secret.
That's the implication presented. The source refers to this whole situation, the dismissive public stance versus the concerned internal position documented in their own classified study as Orwellian doublethink.
Okay, let's touch on the skeptical theories the source addresses.
Right. The book goes through several common explanations and argues why they don't fit the full picture. Ideas like drink or drugs are dismissed. How could that cause shared, detailed hallucinations involving multiple trained observers, including senior officers like Halt, across 2 separate nights? And it doesn't explain the physical evidence, the indentations, the radiation.
Makes sense. What about the prank theory, Kevin Kanai's claim?
That's dismissed as well. Condé's story involved flashing lights on one night much earlier. The source argues it doesn't match the timeline spanning 2 distinct nights of activity, doesn't explain the close-range object Penniston touched, the physical ground traces, the radiation, or the radar data mentioned elsewhere. The book also notes Halt himself was very skeptical of Condé's claim actually explaining what his team encountered.
Okay, what else? A burning truck?
There was a story about a burning truck near the base, but the source calls it an unsubstantiated single-source claim. No independent evidence, and again, it doesn't explain the detailed descriptions, the 2 nights, the physical evidence, or radar contacts.
And the lighthouse. We mentioned they saw it later.
Yeah, right. While witnesses did see the Orfordness Lighthouse beacon after the primary events on both nights, the source emphasizes that even the lighthouse keeper himself, and the original proponent of the lighthouse theory, eventually dismissed it as an explanation for the main described phenomena. They basically said the lighthouse simply couldn't do what those airmen and local people describe, maneuvering through trees, having distinct shapes and lights, leaving marks, beaming down lights.
So the lighthouse explains the distant light they saw later, but not the close encounters.
That's the argument presented, yes. Theories about it being staged as some kind of exotic guard force test or mind control experiments or advanced holography are also dismissed by the source as highly unlikely. Military policy generally prohibits exposing troops to unknown hazards like that without their knowledge, and the fact these witnesses went public and stuck to their stories for decades makes it unlikely they were part of some secret test they knew about.
The source also mentions some other strange, unexplained elements discovered during investigations over the years.
Yeah, a few intriguing loose ends. There's a mention of potential warnings related to, of all things, prison evacuations around that time, but official records related to that seem to be missing.
Huh. Odd.
Very odd. There's also a rumor, noted in the source, of figures in full NBC suits, nuclear, biological, chemical protection gear being seen near another RAF base, Watton, on the same night as Halt's encounter in the forest. Maybe related to a biological hazard check. Logbooks related to that area also reportedly went missing.
NBC suits.
Important Down, which is the UK's military research facility often linked to chemical and biological work, officially denied any involvement or visits related to the Rendlesham incident via a formal parliamentary question, or PQ.
So an official denial there.
An official denial. And finally, there are persistent rumors, noted in the source, of men in black types searching the forest area afterwards. There's even an account mentioned from a local forester named Vince Thurkettle about encountering such individuals.
Okay, this brings us to a truly unique and frankly quite bizarre aspect of the story presented in this source. The binary code enigma related specifically to Jim Penniston.
Yeah, this is definitely one of the most controversial and unusual parts. The source dedicates significant attention to Penniston's personal account of what happened immediately after he touched the craft on that first night.
What did he experience?
He describes this involuntary, relentless flashing of sequences of ones and zeros, binary code just appearing in his mind's eye. This apparently went on for about 24 hours afterwards.
Flashing numbers in his head.
Yes, and he felt this intense compulsion, almost an obsession, to write them down. He finally gave in and just wrote for about 45 minutes, filling pages of a notebook with these sequences of ones and zeros. According to his account in the source, the flashing images stopped immediately, like the instant he finished writing them all down.
Did he report this at the time?
No. The source describes his intense internal struggle and fear back then. He was apparently terrified for his sanity, worried about his career, his personnel reliability program, PRP certification, which is crucial for handling sensitive duties.
Right, you need that for nuclear weapons access and things like that.
Exactly, and his security clearance. He feared reporting this bizarre internal experience would destroy all of that. So he chose not to raise the issue initially, keeping it completely secret for years.
So how did it come out?
It wasn't revealed until much later in 1994, long after he had left the Air Force. He underwent hypnosis seeking help for unrelated sleep disorders, and this experience surfaced during the session.
Under hypnosis. Okay, and what was the interpretation that came out of that?
Well, the idea that emerged from the hypnosis session, as presented in the source, was that this experience was some kind of telepathic download, and even more strangely, possibly a message from time travelers from the future.
Time travelers, not aliens.
That's the specific suggestion that reportedly came out of the hypnosis time travelers. The source also notes the therapist's suggestion that maybe the AFOSI, the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, who debriefed Penniston extensively using drugs and possibly hypnosis back in the 80s.
Right, you mentioned the debriefings.
That they might have actually anticipated this possibility, this download, and perhaps even used post-hypnotic suggestion during their sessions to keep him silent about it until later.
That's a lot to unpack. Telepathic download, time travelers, hypnotic suggestion.
It's acknowledged, even in the source, how bizarre the specific claim is. Time travel theories are very uncommon in ufology, generally. It contrasts sharply with the more expected extraterrestrial story one might imagine if someone were just, say, confabulating or making something up under hypnosis. The book notes Penniston's own anxiety and self-doubt about this particular aspect of his experience.
What's Penniston's perspective on the code now, according to the source?
His current perspective, as described in the source, is that he sees it as a genuine message, possibly intended for all mankind. He believes the contact's primary purpose might have been specifically to deliver this message now, at this point in time, and he feels there is much more to come, suggesting the full meaning isn't understood or revealed yet.
And how does he address inconsistencies people point out in his accounts over the years?
He views some of the minor inconsistencies that critics highlight not necessarily as signs of fabrication, but potentially as results of the, quote, inept debriefing methods used on him, including the alleged drug-induced attempted extraction of information during those official interviews back then. Or perhaps just the inherently strange and reality-bending nature of the phenomenon itself impacting memory and recall.
Okay. Looking at this from a higher level now, the source brings in the perspectives of some pretty senior figures who have weighed in on Rendlesham over the years.
Yes, it does. Lord Hilnorton, for instance. He was a former chief of the defense staff in the UK, a very, very senior military position. He's presented as a believer in the seriousness of the phenomenon who actually accused the governments of a cover-up.
A top military guy saying cover-up.
Yes. The source notes he even debated the subject in Parliament in the House of Lords back in 1979 and was frustrated that he wasn't proactively briefed on significant incidents like Rendlesham while he was actually in post. His high rank really challenged the narrative that only crackpots took UFOs seriously.
Interesting. And Margaret Thatcher.
There's an intriguing mention of a conversation the late investigator Georgina Bruni reportedly had with former Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. The source relays Thatcher's potentially cryptic remarks, things like telling Bruni to get your facts straight, and then saying something like, you can't talk about it, you must get your facts right. We can't let the cat out of the bag because of national security concerns.
Vague but suggestive.
Very. Witnesses like Burroughs interpreted these comments as confirmation that Thatcher knew something significant and classified about the incident or the phenomenon in general.
What about Colonel, later Major General, Gordon Williams, the wing commander at the time?
He comes up again. He's noted for his later meeting, years later, with Penniston and Burroughs. The source recounts him expressing support for their quest for truth, apparently calling them the most persistent sons of a bitches he'd ever met, maybe admiringly.
Oh.
And crucially, the book describes Williams confirming something important. After the witnesses showed him a declassified document, he apparently confirmed that, yes, wing commanders were indeed briefed on the UFO phenomenon and were given procedures on how to handle sightings under their command.
Which seems to directly contradict his apparent lack of questions during that first debriefing Penniston described.
Exactly. It adds another layer of complexity to his role and knowledge at the time.
And finally, Colonel Conrad, Williams' deputy.
Right. Colonel Ted Conrad, who notably wasn't physically present during Halt's second night incursion into the forest, the source presents his perspective, which remains staunchly skeptical throughout. He denied any cover-up, was critical of Halt's actions and conclusions, and maintained his belief it could likely be explained as a hoax or some kind of natural phenomenon. He apparently deemed any extraterrestrial explanation way high against the evidence, in his view.
So, clear disagreement there at the command level.
Yes. The source highlights the differing perspectives and also notes some apparent personal animosity that existed between Halt and Conrad over the incident and its handling.
So where does this leave Penniston and Burroughs now?
The source reiterates their ongoing search for answers, supported by their attorney, Pat Frescagna. The book mentions their intention to potentially file a federal lawsuit against the U.S. government, specifically because of the perceived FOIA stonewalling and the continued refusal to release their full medical and service records.
Still fighting for those records after all this time.
Still fighting. And the source details the support they've received, including former congressional representatives who have actually written letters to the Secretary of Veterans Affairs and even, reportedly, the President of the United States, requesting the release of their military medical records specifically for proper diagnosis and treatment of their ongoing health issues.
So pulling back, the core findings presented in this source material paint a really complex picture.
Definitely. It's a multi-witness military incident involving reported physical evidence like ground traces and radiation readings. You have internal high-level UK studies that seem to contradict public denials. You have witnesses suffering significant and ongoing health problems they attribute directly to the event. And layered over all of it is this persistent government secrecy and perceived evasiveness.
And the source suggests potential reasons for this continued secrecy.
Yes. Reasons raised by investigators involved in the case. Perhaps it's about the potential acquisition or even weaponization of some unknown technology associated with the phenomenon, something of incalculable power and value. Or maybe it's simpler. Maybe it's just about preventing what authorities might see as an earth-shattering revelation that they feel the public isn't ready for, or that would undermine authority.
Right. So the Rendlesham Forest incident clearly stands as this major battleground of debate, much like, say, The Roswell case.
Exactly. But as this source highlights, it's one where proponents point to a really compelling accumulation of military testimony supporting political documents, opinions from high-level figures, and that reported physical evidence.
So why is diving into this case, using sources like this one, important for you, the listener?
Well, because it's a case that profoundly challenges assumptions. Assumptions about what's possible in our reality, certainly, but also assumptions about government transparency and accountability, especially when dealing with military personnel. And it raises serious questions about the treatment of veterans who experience potentially extraordinary, maybe even hazardous events in the line of duty.
And it's a powerful example of how, despite official documentation like the Halt memo, witness testimony spanning decades now, and even high-level opinions weighing in.
The individuals most affected, Penniston and Burroughs in particular, are, according to the source, still actively seeking official confirmation and just fundamental answers about what actually happened to them in those woods back in 1980.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought drawn directly from the experiences and the claims within the source material for you to consider. Could that strange binary code Jim Penniston felt compelled to write down after touching the object? Could it genuinely be a message meant for humanity? Perhaps even implying something as completely mind-bending as time travel being real.
Or does the intense documented secrecy, the missing records, the official evasiveness, those classified studies like Condign, does that ultimately point to an even bigger, maybe more profound secret about the phenomenon itself? Something the powers that be are truly desperate to keep hidden away. The quest for the full truth, certainly for those involved, continues.